I'm Ashton Addison from Block West Capital for Investment Pitch Media, and today on the Crypto Coin Show we have Riaz Lalani, founder of Gambit. Riaz, welcome to the show, and thank you for taking the time.
Thanks for having me, Ashton.
You're very welcome. Let's dive into fantasy sports, gaming, and incorporating NFTs and blockchain to really bring ownership and more exciting aspects to gaming, which I feel like is just going to be the norm moving forward. Let's start our conversation off by just hearing a little bit about what you and your team have developed at Gambit, and then we'll dive into all things esports and fantasy gaming.
Yeah, no, that's great. So Gambit is a play-to-earn fantasy sports game that we developed over the past 7 or 8 months. We just launched an alpha in April with the NBA playoffs, and when my background is in gaming. I worked at Zynga for a bit, as well as a sports media company called The Score. And, in those experiences, I built a fantasy sports game in a free-to-play world. And there's some amazing elements of crypto and Web3 that we thought would be tremendously valuable to the user experience if we sort of created a fantasy sports game with those crypto primitives. And so that's kind of, what kind of solidified excuse me, sorry. My throat. That's what solidified the core concept of Gambit, where we're applying the ideas of accessibility and ownership. And so when you play Gambit, you're buying athlete tokens, right? So instead of playing a lineup where you just select a set of athletes and have those athletes for one night, you're purchasing these athlete tokens. And we have this athlete marketplace that allows you to facilitate buying and selling of these athlete tokens. So you can, as a casual player, you can buy an athlete, let's say a rookie that you think is going to be really valuable in the future, and hold that athlete until at some point in the future you want to sell them. But really, there's another way to play, which is our daily contests. And with our daily contests, you're essentially using the athlete marketplace to buy a team. And when you use those athlete tokens in these contests, you're competing with other folks in a real live contest that uses the real life performance of all of these athletes in their actual matches. Mm-hmm. And so by combining kind of this ownership model with this game model, the participants in the game earn Gambit if they win. And so this creates an amazing flywheel that doesn't really exist in Web2 fantasy games. We call it build, play, earn. And so the idea is, you're building a team, you're playing, and you're earning, and then you're incentivized to continue to play more games and earn more. It's just keeping, our Gambit, our token, in the ecosystem. Mm-hmm. There are other games in Web3 that are using, fantasy. SoRare is a very common, example of, success in the Web3 fantasy space. And, we're doing something a little bit different than SoRare. One of the challenges with Web3 fantasy games is that they use NFTs. And, we chose very purposefully not to use NFTs or using fungible tokens to drive our marketplace. And the reason for that is when you have an NFT, it's scarce. And so, for an average casual sports fan to play SoRare, they are spending a lot of money to buy that rare Messi card. It's thousands and thousands of dollars. And so it kind of really makes it inaccessible for a large audience. And so by using fungible tokens, you can buy fractions of your favorite athlete. And so, if I wanted to buy Messi because he's my favorite, football star, I can buy Messi. I can buy, half a token of Messi, or I can buy 10 tokens of Messi, and I have the ability to do that. Another interesting thing about, kind of the Web3 mechanics with NFTs is that they use, a card opening mechanic. I open up a pack of cards and I randomly get 3 or 4 or 5, athletes. Some of them I may not even be familiar with, and it's our perspective that fantasy sports is a way to bring sports fans closer to their favorite athletes and teams. And so, when I want to participate in these games, it's a game of skill, and I want to be able to purchase the athletes that I want to purchase. And so, that's how we sort of differentiated ourselves from, your traditional Web2 fantasy sports games, as well as, Web3 as well.
Mm-hmm. Very cool, Riaz. Thanks for that intro. And I really do like that sort of play to own. I haven't seen that in fantasy sports, where there's almost like there's a game, but then there's like the long-term game on top of that as well.
Yeah.
Where, people that want to root for the underdog can like hold on to those tokens. And now it can get a little confusing talking about tokens and then the Gambit token. Are the player tokens that are within Gambit, are those sort of like in-game tokens, or are those actual cryptocurrencies, or the only cryptocurrency is actually the Gambit currency itself?
I mean, right now, the in-game tokens are an in-game construct, and the future is that we will want to go and put those athlete tokens on the blockchain as well, right? So there's a path to progressively decentralize a large part of the game, but at least in our initial kind of implementation, in our alpha and our beta, where we're learning about kind of the game mechanics, the economic factors that come into play, and making sure that we have product market fit. We're largely focused on having Gambit as our cryptocurrency, and then eventually over time the athlete tokens will be on chain, and then beyond that all of our gaming logic, our contest entry, our settlement, all of that would be moving to smart contracts.
Very cool. Thanks for that. And you mentioned at the beginning working with Zynga on the game side and the score. I'm familiar with both, in sports and gaming, great companies. What kind of knowledge and expertise did you take away from that to ensure that, Gambit will be successful at penetrating into the market?
Yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of things there. At least from my Zynga experience, I worked on games with millions and millions of daily active users, and a big part of building and operating games at that scale is making sure that we have a great UX. And so I see this as one of the challenges when I started exploring Web3, was that the UX wasn't necessarily up to a level that consumers come to expect. And so that's one of the things that we've sort of taken as a big part of our goal, is to make sure that when we deliver experiences for whether it's a crypto native or a newbie, that we're delivering a consumer experience that is easy to understand, right? A big part of what we're doing with Gambit in particular is we're adding a free-to-play tier. And so we want people to learn about, one, fantasy sports at their own pace, and two, learn about crypto at that pace as well. And so by allowing folks to come in and play our game and then upsell the value of token ownership, we create an experience that allows folks to participate at higher levels of the game at their pace. A lot of the early Web3 games, ask the user to purchase some crypto on day one, learn a game on day one, and they don't really know what they're getting themselves into in often cases, and that's when you lead to a lot of speculation and things like that. From my experience, at the Score, I built a fantasy sports game there, and it was a free to play game. I took a lot of what I learned at Zynga and applied it to the daily fantasy sports space. Right, so having a virtual currency, and things like that, using an ad-based model, and what I learned from building that experience is that retention beyond kind of the sports season, right? So if I'm a fan of the NBA and I'm religiously playing a fantasy sports experience, and when the NBA season ends, I'm kind of done, right? We found it very hard to convert that NBA fan into like a Major League Baseball fan, right? And so what happens is when the new NBA season starts, we are, attempting to reacquire an existing customer, and sometimes it's as easy as sending them a push notification or an email, but oftentimes we're actually spending money, reacquiring the users that we already had, because it's a very competitive market. And so what Web3 and blockchain gives us with these, athlete tokens is that we now have, something that a player can own beyond the season. And one of our goals, at least from a Gambit's perspective, is we want to build games and experiences for the off season, right? We see these athlete tokens as kind of the central piece to almost a fantasy playground, right? So if I own a specific athlete, well, I can play a salary cap game. I can play a very easy kind of tier-based groups game. In the off season, I can play a game that uses historical stats. There's a whole bunch of different games that we plan to build around this central idea that we've got, participants in our game who own these athlete tokens, and it will continue to drive more utility for each of those participants and those athlete tokens.
Mm-hmm. Very cool. Great to hear about that experience. And I want to go back to the point about having sort of an ownership in the athletes, in the platform, and having financial incentives from that. Have you seen in the market that these players that are playing fantasy sports, they really want to have that financial incentive where they're coming away, they're actually betting their own money and earning money? And is that kind of industry continuing to grow in what you're building?
I mean, if you look at fantasy sports in general, there's kind of two flavors to it. There's a season-long flavor, which it's me and a couple of friends, start a fantasy league at the start of the season. We draft. It's a very social experience. Generally speaking, there's money on the line, right? People are putting some money on the line, and there's a big prize pool with a whole bunch of winners at the end. In daily, it becomes a little less social and more transactional, where the outcome again is the financial incentives. And certainly, the existing model for fantasy sports supports the idea that I am going to participate in some sort of game, and there is some financial reward. And I don't think that changes for us as well. I just think that it gives us a lot more creativity on how we deliver a lot of these experiences. It also allows us to think about new users in emerging markets. So we're focused. A lot of our alpha was built on an audience in emerging markets: Indonesia, Vietnam, Philippines, India, and we saw a lot of engagement from these players who, again, as I mentioned, we're not necessarily NBA fans, but started to learn about the NBA and participate. Maybe their initial intention was the financial incentive, but they came to learn the game and became active Discord members talking about the game, which was kind of an amazing thing to see. There was even one of our Discord members, got a streaming package so they can watch the NBA games in India and follow along while they're playing the game. And so, we see this opportunity to bring fantasy sports and that connection between, fans and athletes and teams to a part of the world that hasn't necessarily seen it. Fantasy sports has generally been, a North American phenomenon.
Definitely, yeah, and I'm curious about that because having a huge up and coming growth in these emerging markets and sort of the Asian market, where do you focus your time on the sports that you add in? What's the priority for Gambit? You mentioned NBA at the beginning. Are you focusing on sort of the big four American sports? In Asia, there's other types of sports that are more popular as well. So what's the priority for Gambit in adding other sports into the fantasy league?
Yeah, well, right now we're focused on large, international sports that have, penetration kind of globally. So the NBA makes a lot of sense. When we looked at the NBA initially, I don't know a lot of people know this, but outside of the U.S., the Philippines is the second largest market for the NBA. And so, if you take the fact that the Philippines is also a large portion of the users who are playing Axie Infinity, it almost creates this perfect mix for us to go and take a lot of these attributes of play to earn and play to own and bring them to a market where there's already a high level of interest in that sport. Beyond the NBA, we're looking at soccer. So in August, we're launching our beta with 5 Euro soccer leagues. Again, or football, I should say. Being in Canada, we say soccer. Football is very, very huge internationally. Right? It's a global sport. They've got fans all around the world. Southeast Asia, Europe, Africa, parts where again there's not a lot of fantasy sports and a lot of fantasy sports offerings, and so looking at that is an important part of it. Beyond that, there's something that's happening in November, which is the World Cup, and we see this as a very opportunistic point in time where we can again have the opportunity to deliver an experience to folks globally There's a high level of interest around that time. When I worked at the Score, we built a bot on Messenger, and our highest peak, in terms of usage, was around the World Cup, and so we really see that as a great opportunity for us to drive new users to the platform and engage with the fun games that we're building. Beyond that, we're looking at cricket. India is a gigantic market. Yeah. It's a gigantic market for fantasy sports. I believe there's 100 million fantasy cricket players in India already. Wow. There's companies like Dream11 have done a tremendous job taking that traditional Web 2 model and applying it to India. And so, we feel, that is, a huge opportunity for us as well. So, tend to focus on those large international sports. After we get past those, there's obviously those North American sports that are huge. American football would be on that list. It doesn't necessarily mean that we have to stay in kind of your traditional sports realm. We can get into esports and other categories as well, where there's team-based play.
Very cool, Riaz. Looking forward to that. And you mentioned about the World Cup. I think that's going to be huge. A great opportunity to build up to then. And I saw in the recent news that to help with that and just the growth of the platform, your team recently closed a seed round. So congratulations on that. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that, your partners, and how that helps moving forward.
Yeah, that was a pre-seed round. We were funded by a venture studio called SuperLayer. So SuperLayer is a venture studio that incubates various set of consumer tokenized applications. And so, I joined, them to help incubate and build Gambit. It's run by Kevin Chu, who, previously, built Kabam, which is a massive gaming platform, and sold it for, I think, approximately $1 billion. And then built, Rally, the innovators in social tokens, and Forte, which is a blockchain middleware company. And so Kevin, along with Mahesh, his partner, decided to build SuperLayer to, fund and grow, a bunch of amazing, consumer-focused tokenized applications.
Wow, incredible! Great to have those partners. And you mentioned, there's a lot of different sports and growth in the works, but right now there's the Alpha and NBA. What's the best way for people to get started with that, or just to learn more about the platform and talk to others in the community?
Yeah, I mean, the easiest way is to one, sign up for our beta, which is coming in early August with Euro football. You can do that at gambitgames.com. And, from there's our socials. So we've got a very active Discord with, about 20,000 folks in it right now. And as well as Twitter, where we'll be updating, our community on what's happening.
Great, Riaz. I will leave those links in the description box below for the viewers to make it easy as well. Thank you so much for the insights on fantasy sports, blockchain, play to own, which I think is very exciting. All the best with all of the growth moving forward with Gambit, and let's follow up in the near future.
Okay, awesome. Great to chat, Ashton. Appreciate it.